I recently visited the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts to see a major exhibition by the American painter Mark Tansey. Born in California in 1949, he currently lives and works in New York. Tansey has been classified as a historical painter, narrative artist, philosophical painter, and more broadly as postmodern. However, none of these labels fully define him. He resembles many things, but in the end, he is truly one of a kind. Tansey was born under the strong influence of abstract art and grew up during the era of pop and conceptual art. The great American painting of the mid-20th century was the traditional school where he trained, an academy where discoveries and boldness had already become the norm. My artistic education felt like a catechism class, he says. And so he set out to find other paths. He became a figurative painter, creating large-format oil paintings that, at first glance, seem like a return to realism, with one eye on hyperrealism and the other on magical realism, but with different implications. Tansey's highly refined technique involves covering the entire canvas with a single color and then gradually removing the paint, creating images using only values obtained with white and black. The result is large monochromatic scenes that resemble reproductions of old photographs from the 1940s. In fact, he uses photos from magazines of that era as his starting point, and his preferred colors are the typographic hues of the time: pink, blue, and sepia. The choice of representational art, of painting with content, is not what makes his work original. Despite the dominance of abstraction, 20th century painting never completely abandoned figuration. In the last decade, so many painters have returned to it that they have been collectively labeled new figurative artists, deserving of numerous group exhibitions and studies. Tansey's originality lies in the ambition and complexity of his project, which is not merely to represent, document, or narrate real scenes, but, through pseudo-realistic representations, to explore questions of philosophy, aesthetics, anthropology, linguistics, and literary theory, originally found in the books of university libraries. Each of Tansey's paintings is a response to these texts, and at the same time a challenge to the viewer. The issues are developed with sensitive intelligence and subtle humor, which are usually absent from academic theoretical texts. The final result is not merely discursive but a visual work that provokes reflection. One of Tansey's paintings, titled The Innocent Eye Test, painted in 1981 and part of the Metropolitan Museum of Art's collection, depicts a group of old-fashioned, professorial-looking men solemnly examining a bucolic painting, Two Oxen Under a Tree, a work by the 17th century Dutch painter Paulus Potter. On the wall beside it hangs another painting of an equally pastoral theme, Haystacks by Monet. The professor's gazes are fixed on the viewer, to whom they are presenting the painting. A real cow, on the same scale as the painted oxen, stares intently at its painted counterparts, one of whom gazes back at the cow. In the right corner of the scene, one of the scientists, wearing a lab coat, carefully records the results of the experiment. The comedic effect is immediate. What is the cow thinking about the painting? Does it identify with the subject? And we, the real viewers, watching the cow look at its painted brothers, become as bovine as it is. Our smile loses its superiority. Tansey's painting can be seen as a metaphor for the perception of art. The scientists are the art critics, and vast philosophical, scientific, and aesthetic problems come to mind. Or are we, by thinking about them, merely trying to reclaim our superiority as rational beings? Are we grabbing our mental notepad like the scientist in the painting, and losing our ability to have an innocent gaze? Frank Stella has a famous phrase that certainly resonates with Tansey's reflection: what you see is what you see. Another of Tansey's paintings, titled White on White, from 1986, depicts a vast, desolate plain swept by the wind, where two human groups face each other, moving toward one another. At first glance, there is a sense of déjà vu, an academic painting of the exotic landscape genre, or a geographic magazine photo, showing expeditions in distant, inhospitable places. A closer look, however, reveals the incongruity of the scene. One group consists of Arabs with their camels, the other of Eskimos with their dogs and sleds. Sand and snow blend seamlessly, making the scene visually tranquil, while our knowledge of the clothing and attributes of the characters alerts us to the geographic impossibility of this encounter. We smile at the joke, but does it end there? The scene neutralizes numerous oppositions: heat and cold, north and south, sky and earth, conflict and reconciliation. We think about the gradual disappearance of traditional clothing and cultural differences, that erasure of the rainbow of cultures mentioned by Levi-Strauss, whom Tansey reads. We observe that neither of the two human groups in white on white is of the white race. We recall that the pictorial problem of white on white is one of the landmarks of 20th century painting with Malevich. We think that in structural linguistics, another common reading of Tansey, opposition is what creates meaning, and when it is abolished, meaning is lost. Did Tansey think of all this? Certainly he thought of many of these things and others that have not yet occurred to us. But his goal is not merely for us to recover what he thought, but for us to continue thinking beyond him. The inspiring questions of Tansey's work became increasingly complex after 1990. An avid reader of the literary theorists of the Yale School, themselves readers of the French structuralists and post-structuralists, Tansey transformed these intellectuals into characters, staging scenes that allegorize the theories developed in their books. In 1987, he painted the Mount Sainte-Victoire, where, in front of the famous landscape so often painted by Cézanne, a group of tourists appears, among whom we recognize Derrida, Barthes, and Foucault, specialists in showing that every text hides another text and that things are not what they seem. In the water, all images transform. The mountain becomes a cave, the sky turns into rock, and the bathers become women. In 1990, he painted Close Reading, where a climber scales a rock. Looking closely, the rock is covered with almost legible text fragments, remnants of text by Paul de Man, the master of Yale deconstruction, taken from his work Blindness and Insight, where he says, "Literary texts are themselves critical, but blind, and critical reading tries to deconstruct the blindness. The climber, with her face against the rock, seems to see nothing, only focused on the physical effort of climbing." Another painting from the same year, more grandiose, is titled Constructing the Grand Canyon. In the majestic landscape, dozens of young people dig, hammer, drill with jackhammers, and sift gravel. At the center of the scene, a group of little men directs the work, among them Paul de Man and Jacques Derrida. Seated further ahead, a pensive Harold Bloom, Michel Foucault in the right corner, observes. As in the previous painting, the walls of the Grand Canyon are covered with texts that are gradually reduced to fragments and dust. The group of philosophers alludes to Raphael's School of Athens in an ambiguous homage to the deconstructionists. As is known, deconstruction consists of dismantling, excavating texts, endlessly revealing what lies beneath erasure. That is what everyone is doing there. But is this task, as in ancient philosophy, an elevated search for truth? Building the Grand Canyon is in itself an absurd idea, and in fact, they are destroying it. Is Tansey himself a deconstructionist? His painting deconstructs the very philosophers and their theories, in addition to his painting being, technically and materially, the result of infinite erasures. Even more ambiguous is the beautiful Derrida interrogating de Man, also from 1990. In a mountainous landscape, Derrida and de Man, hand in hand, fight or dance. It is impossible to tell on the edge of an abyss. The scene is inspired by an illustration from Conan Doyle's The Final Problem, the struggle between Sherlock Holmes and Professor Moriarty. It is an allusion to the controversy that arose after de Man's death, when it was discovered that he had allied with Nazi groups in his youth. On that occasion, Derrida defended the man in a move some considered blind. Tansey's themes are not limited to current events. Other paintings of his allegorize Plato's cave, the Wheel of David, and the history of painting. Particularly amusing is The Triumph of the New York School, from 1986, where Picasso, de Kooning, Matisse, and others, dressed as soldiers from the War of 1812, face Newman, Rothko, and others, wearing the much more relaxed uniforms of World War II. The painting is a parody of Velázquez's The Surrender of Breda. In fact, Tansey revisits the entire history of painting in his works. The Renaissance holds a special place, which he explores through the use of allegory, the theme of the wheel, the frame, the practice of perspective, and trompe-l'œil. In his own words, Tansey says that his paintings aspire to the category of sketches and caprices, like those of Tiepolo, Goya, and Max Ernst. From surrealism, he recovers the taste for old images and surprising collages. This mix should not be hastily labeled as postmodern, because Tansey does not merely quote and combine in a playful and casual way. Tansey's art thinks and makes us think, but it is not pure illustration of concepts, because it is the images that produce thought without ceasing to be images. The art historian George Kubler once said that every work is the solution to a problem. Mark Tansey comments, "The important thing is that each solution points to the existence of some problem for which there have already been other solutions, and that other solutions to the same problem will probably be invented next. As solutions accumulate, the problem changes. The chain of solutions, however, never unveils the problem." Therefore, Tansey's paintings do not claim truth or the uniqueness of a concept prior to or following the production of the work. There is only a chain of solutions, a string of metaphorous expression in which the artist and the viewers are inscribed. His allegories have no final reading. They are meant to be read and reread. As the critic Judy Freeman, who wrote an excellent text for the exhibition catalogue, says, "The basic concepts of Tansey's work are those of the search, loss of truth, and the construction, deconstruction of meaning. The search for truth is allegorized by the large number of characters in his work, who are digging, cleaning, searching for things in crevices or undressing. Construction is the apparent activity of many characters, equipped with engineering tools and machines, but the task they dedicate themselves to is usually absurd, such as measuring a coastline with a tape measure. The empiricism of his scientists and the amateurism of his technicians, contrasted with the grandeur of nature, point to a skeptical and ironic attitude toward knowledge and technology. Tansey's art leads to reflection on representation and the very practice of representational painting. Representation was negatively connoted by abstract paint and later textual theorists. In painting, words like subject or meaning were banished. Irreverently, Tansey represents the abstract painters themselves. In the painting Myth of Depth, from 1984, he places Rothko and Mondrian in a small boat, watching Pollock, who, like Christ, walks on water. In the philosophical texts of the 1970s and 1980s, the era of representation was declared over, identified with old Platonic idealism. It was to be replaced, after the epistemological break, by the era of the materialist production of a meaning always deferred. Responding to the objection that pictorial representation is univocal, critical, conservative, totalitarian, and historicist, while textuality is polysemic, critical, open, etc. Tansey seeks to demonstrate that pictorial representation is a text, and that it is possible to question the act of reference within it, to open gaps between representation and its subject, to destabilize the relationship between the signifier, the signified, the viewer, and the theme. The method for the viewer to contemplate a Tansey painting should be the same he uses to conceive it. He starts with simple journalistic questions: who, what, when, where, why. The questions gradually become more complex until they reach a high level of conceptual complexity. In 1989, Tansey established verbal schemes, tables composed of lists of oppositions, problems, motifs, and meta-themes that can be combined to produce numerous cases to be explored. He then conceived a wooden wheel made of rings covered with words. By rotating the rings, 5,872 possibilities are generated, like the immense Cadavre squeeze, a game invented by the surrealists. Didn't use a computer. A photo of Tansey's studio is very revealing. A large, distant desk with paper folders, an archive of images he has collected since childhood, a long semicircular desk covered with paper boxes, a corner table, and a traditional easel, a cat, a tray with a teapot and milk jug. No electronic equipment in sight. He is an anachronist. His world of references is made up of books and magazines, printed images. It is worth noting that he is the son of a professor and a librarian. CDs and virtual reality, in principle so convenient for a creation like his, seem not to interest him. Tansey is a manual craftsman, a sensualist, an admirer of old materials like canvas, oil, paper, and wood. The Xerox machine allows the hand to print directly on the reproductive surface and produce the same tonal granules obtained by mechanical pressure. As another surprise, this nostalgic artist has the face of a sporty young man, quite incongruous. If it depends on him, the old world of books, of texts that make us think, and of illustrations that make us dream, which can be touched with our hands. And the even older world of oil on canvas will not die anytime soon. With Tansey, we are back, carrying in our baggage everything that time has accumulated. The arrangements, however, date from today, as does the uncertainty about their meaning and purpose.